I think marketing is much, much more important in reality than we tend to acknowledge. And I always say, I'm a huge fan of Octopus Energy, okay? And I always think there's a parallel universe in which they decided to call themselves greentech.com, okay? And they didn't have a pink octopus as a logo. And in that parallel universe, they've got 30,000 customers, okay? I think how things are framed, how they're perceived, what the frame of comparison is, whether you feel something's expensive or cheap, partly depends on the price. But far more, it actually depends. Price, as I always say, to economists, price is a number. To consumers, price is a feeling. Okay, the same thing can feel expensive or feel cheap, entirely dependent on your what you might call on context, mental context, environmental context. If you go into Sunglass Hut or a premium sunglass retailer, a £70 pair of sunglasses will seem extraordinarily cheap. If you go into Boots, it will seem insanely expensive.
Yeah, that's anchoring, isn't it, right?
Anchoring's kind of a sort of subdivision.
One of the things I've read you say is like we need ideas. It's not the idea; it's actually the selling of the idea, which is important. And I've got into this ice bath thing, right? And I think it's kind of my morning routine.
I was talking to Jimmy Carr last night, and he's into this thing where you go into a sauna and then jump into a freezing
so mine's
bath.
a bit of an oxymoron because I'll jump into the ice bath for 3 minutes and then have a cigarette afterwards. So it's like kind of like
yin and yang.
Okay. I'm doing the breath work in and then just.
So do you have an ice bath at home? What do you do?
Yeah, well, this is what I'm saying. It's just what these guys have done. It's so clever. They've basically sold me a fucking paddling pool, right? Which you basically pump it up yourself. Yeah. They've packaged it as this is an ice bath which does all this stuff for your mental health, your well-being, and you do.
Is this place up in London in Mayfair or somewhere like that?
So what's happened is these high status gyms and these high status people like Andrew Huberman.
They've sold you an unheated paddling pool.
Unheated paddling pool, right?
Yeah.
Which you fill up yourself. It's kind of mucky. It's got like a little thing you honk onto the side of it. And you can set the temperature. But I'm like, and actually, is it getting? It must be the selling of this idea is so good that people are willing to put themselves in that much discomfort.
Let's be really brutal here, right? Okay. Sushi. If sushi weren't Japanese, okay, and you were shown a documentary where these, effectively these Brazilian or Somalian hunter-gatherers, were forced to eat raw fish wrapped up in rice inside a leaf, your natural reaction would be, poor fuckers, I hope that never happens to me, right? Okay, but you make it Japanese. Yeah. And the entire way in which we perceive it. There's a brilliant thing which I'm going to start this tradition, okay, where podcast guests get to plug things, because I don't think the podcast host should have exclusive rights over over influencer marketing. There's a place in Santa Fe, New Mexico, just outside I think it's called 10,000 Waves, and it's a Japanese spa. And you go in, typically in a group, and you have this kind of interesting kind of bath thing, and you wear a kind of weird robe, and there are lots of tatami mats dotted around the place. And it's one of the most enjoyable days I've ever spent in my life. I went with my whole family, and we took a room, okay, and it was fantastic. And then it occurred to me that if it weren't Japanese, I would have thought, this is a really ridiculous thing. I'm basically paying to use a gigantic bath with some wood stuff around, okay? But because it's Japanese, a huge amount of the mental groundwork in getting me to accept it has already been done. And consequently, I think there are a lot of things, okay, which are unbelievably marketing dependent, and we never realise they are.
Such as?
Well, I mentioned sushi, which is if it weren't Japanese, if you were told that, impoverished African peasants were wrapping up raw fish in, bits of rice and leaf, okay, that would probably have had vastly less appeal. And miso soup is the most extreme case, okay? Which, Heinz would never have launched miso soup, would they? Because they would have done a bit of research and people would have said it's disgusting and there's a weird leaf in it. What the hell are you talking about? Why do you think... Well, because it's Japanese, we think it has sort of age-old, venerable qualities, and it has cleansing properties and all that kind of thing. So the extent to which we're capable of actually objectively evaluating anything, right, seems to me pretty limited. And then when people get angry about marketing and say it's manipulating people, and it's taking things that people don't need and making them more attractive, yeah, it's probably true, quite a lot of things. On the other hand, I said, let's look at the best idea that anybody's ever had in world history, which in terms of its outcome is probably smallpox vaccination, Edward Jenner. I mean, we can all have an argument about this, okay? You know, you can mention the steam engine, okay? But I would probably say that if you exclude religion, which probably had hugely beneficial effects, and maybe tea as well, but had huge effects in allowing people to cohabit in more densely populated areas, okay? But smallpox vaccination, undoubtedly, you know, up there in the top 10. Now, we always assume, naively, don't we, when we look at history, with the benefit of hindsight, that Edward Jenner has this insight that dairymaids don't get smallpox. And the theory is that because they've been infected with cowpox first, which gives them immunity to smallpox while being a much, much milder strain, therefore it's a good idea to infect yourself deliberately with cowpox, and therefore, you know, completely, not completely, but very, very reliably then remove the risk of smallpox. Now that means that, you know, one of your children doesn't die and two of them aren't unpleasantly disfigured. It's an unbelievably important idea, okay? You'd think, wouldn't it? People go, well, Ted, you've really cracked this one. God, we've been looking for a cure for that for ages. Thanks for that. We're all going to vaccinate our kids. Did people do that? Did they bollocks? Jenner had to spend his whole life basically arguing his case. And the marketing breakthrough, I think, though I need someone to check this, okay? The marketing breakthrough was probably getting the king to vaccinate his own children. Because the king was the supreme social media influencer.
Yeah, he's the high status.
The high status person whom other people imitate. And a lot of people, not unreasonably, took the heuristic, which is that if the king, who is extremely well advised, is making this decision, yes, I'm just wondering which king it would have been. If the king's doing this, it's probably okay for me.
Espressos is sponsored by supply chain software gurus Unleashed. It talks to your e-com and accounting software. It's helped islands cut admin time in half, get granular clarity on your margins, know where your stock is, don't miss availability. Brands like Candy Kittens, Tiny Rebel and Trip all use Unleashed, and so should you.